Welcome to Pro Audio Profiles. I'm Brennan Decora, and on this show, we focus on techniques for inspired studio performances. Each week, I host experts from across the industry. Let's get started. On today's show, we have Roy Boukris. He's a mastering engineer that's worked with Jager Henry Bonham, Flyana Boss, Sam Marsey, and many more. Enjoy. So, I want to thank you for being here first and foremost.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
I'd like to start if you want to go over your backstory, kind of what led you to engineering, mastering, all that kind of stuff, how you got here.
Sure. Well, I started as a musician. I started as playing piano when I was 6 years old. My parents I was into sports, but my parents were like, you have to play the piano at least once a week. They kind of insisted on it, and I was like, the beginning I wasn't really into it, but as years passed by, I was like, I began to like it more and more. And when I understood that sports is not something that I'm too good at, I was, you're 14 years old, you get to like playing guitar is cool, and so I transitioned from piano to guitar when I was 14. Really took it seriously, and then I played a lot of hours a day, and was shedding. And then basically what happened is that the army, in Israel you have to go to the army, so I was fortunate enough to be in the army band. I auditioned to play, and I ended up playing the Air Force band for 3 years. And after the army, I started gigging more with some people, like as a studio musician, and also some gigs and live shows. And I very early on, I understood that I'm not the kind of person who likes touring, being on stage, and I felt in love with the studio because you have the AC on and you can do a take until everything's perfect. You can just do it over and over, and it kind of fits my personality of getting it right. And as a guitar player, I wasn't always like the best guitar player. It felt to me, I always got like people really enjoyed my sound, so they were like, you sound cool, like the sound is really good. I tried to go into jazz, and I forced myself to be a jazz musician, and I was never as good as what I wanted to be. I had better musicians around me, so naturally I gravitated to studio life. I basically wanted to learn everything about the craft of making a record, from the production standpoint, arrangement, to engineering, mixing. I really said, there's too many good musicians out there, and at least from what I felt at that time, I didn't know that there's enough engineers as well. But from since my friends were musicians and artists, I felt like I can probably help more if I'll be an engineer, and that's how I did that. And I studied after the army. I went to study sound in 2 different schools in Israel. One was called music, and they taught me the basics of engineering. Then I went on to a studio called Pluto Studios in Israel, which is a very nice facility. And they kind of gave you a more hands-on experience. It was almost kind of like Blackbird here, where a studio opens a thing, and then you kind of, since it's a great studio, they let you be assistant, they let you assist on actual sessions, so it's more like a hands-on experience. And then I decided that the music in Israel is limited to what I aspire to do, and the music I grew up on and love is not Israeli music. So I was like, I need to move, and the easiest way for me was to do it through education. So I applied to Berkeley, and you have to audition on an instrument or anything. So I auditioned on guitar.
Even you went for the engineering program?
Yes, I did music production and engineering in Berkeley.
But then why do they make you do?
Apparently, because apparently you have to be a musician or a singer or anything like that to get into Berklee. Yeah, so because you can't know that you'll get accepted to the production engineering program because they're limited in the amount of space they have and the amount of studios and facilities they can accommodate. So when you start Berklee, the first semester is like you don't have your major yet.
I see.
And then after the first semester, you apply to the major you want, which I already knew that I want the production engineering one. But
that's interesting.
And then I got into that program, and the rest is history. I was really. Also, I came with a bit of experience before because I already did some engineering back then, so I knew like to get into that program would probably be. Like just the natural thing for me to do.
Right.
And then.
And how did you end up in LA?
Well, after Berklee, I graduated in 2016, and it was like it was New York, Nashville, LA, or Atlanta for some people. Right. Those were the options that I saw as like where there's an industry
where the scene is,
and so I moved to New York just because it was an easier move from Boston. It's a 3-hour drive. I was like, I don't want to fly all my stuff to LA, and I always surrounded myself with a lot of jazz musicians early on, and a lot of my friends are really good jazz musicians, and they gravitated to New York just because it's the kind of mecca of jazz.
Right.
So I went to New York, and I got to engineer and record a lot of jazz there. That was before I was like, today I'm doing mastering, but that was still, I was mainly engineering and mixing music, and I was doing a lot of projects of jazz musicians in New York, and I had the privilege to record a lot of great artists there.
Nice.
And then after a while, I felt like I couldn't see myself getting out of the jazz niche, and even though I love it, I felt like it's a it's like a struggle for the artist to actually survive as a jazz musician, unfortunately. And it felt like it's always like, and the clients that kept coming in were jazz, and I wanted to kind of spread more my musical adventure and to tap into more genres. Right. And also my girlfriend, she didn't like New York that much. Yeah. So it was like, okay, we have to find another option. Right. And LA was I came to visit here, actually, a friend, and we went to San Francisco. We did the drive, the drive on the coast, and that was like really nice. And I fell in love with California, and I was like, I think it was mainly a choice for the lifestyle, actually, because the studio is the same everywhere. It's a room, you don't see the sun. Exactly. It doesn't really matter. It actually matters what you feel when you're out of the studio. That 10-minute drive, seeing some palm trees and blue skies, that's the thing that made me... Right. Also, a lot of studios were closing in New York. True, so like Power Station, there was Avatar, and then Avatar was about to close, and it's like one of the most legendary studios. If I'm not mistaken, it's one of the most Grammy-nominated studios in history. And the fact that the lease ended there, and they were trying to find someone to preserve the studio or buy it from them, because if not, they would make it a condos. They would make it like apartments. And that was very sad. And when I heard that Berklee, and I think it's Berklee with a graduate from Berklee who bought it together, and they made it Power Station again. I think that was cool that they returned the name from Avatar to the original Power Station. Right. And that felt to me like, if New York is not actually respecting that studio as a history of the city, because I heard Abbey Road in England, I think, had a similar story where they were running out of money, and if I'm not mistaken, I feel like I know that that basically the government made Abbey Road like a historic place that cannot be shut down. Right. They actually injected some money into there or something like that, and they helped them stay afloat. And I think that's a beautiful thing for culture. Yeah. And I didn't feel that New York is actually on the same page when it comes to culture. Like a lot of historic jazz clubs were closing, and it kind of felt like a decline. A lot of people are struggling to hold their studio. And when I came to visit here, I visited my friend Phil Levine, who's a great engineer, and he works in Igloo Studios. So he just made me a tour, and he's like, this is the studio, and we have so much work coming from all sorts of things and Netflix and stuff. So we're opening 2 more studios down the streets. You want to come see the construction? And I was like, wow, I just came from New York. They're closing all these studios, and I'm in LA. Like they're just building more. That was like a sign for me that here it's still a better place to try and make a living out of what we love doing. So that's what I decided on, and I don't regret it. I love it here.
And how did you get into mastering?
Well, mastering, it actually, I did a lot of engineering, mixing, and I would call myself, I don't know, a slow mixer. I take my time. And in today's world, people want things fast. They want it sometimes in 24 hours turnaround. You know, it's and I was like, I don't know if I can actually be satisfied with not doing it the way I want to. I gravitated to mastering because I felt like, well, you cannot mix a song and master each track on the song and make every little thing sound like, and it's probably not a good thing to do anyways in a mix. You want to have separation, like certain things sound good and certain thing in the back so that it pops out. But my very like attention to detail and stuff, it happened naturally that mastering made me feel like the limitation of having one track makes me hone on it with my attention, and I don't feel like I need to work quicker because someone wants it. It's just a quicker job, a quicker process, and I feel like I can give my all. And
nice.
And also, I think it suits my approach to how I see sound. I'm in like a more like a quality control. I don't know if to like I feel like well, maybe we all are, but I feel like a little bit like an audiophile in a way. Like I really care about quality, preserving the quality. So it just naturally became a thing that mastering suits me the most, and I work fast, so it just happened naturally.
It works. Nice. So I like to talk a lot on the podcast about how to inspire the artists in the studio, and I feel like you have a unique perspective because you've done every role. You know, you've a musician, session musician, engineer, you've done mixing, now you're mastering. So it's like, how do you, when you're mastering, I know it's difficult sometimes because it's the last step. Obviously, you know, sometimes the artist isn't even around. But how do you sort of maintain the artist's original vision while you're adding your own touch?
It's a good question. Well, I feel like it's first of all being on the same page and like really getting to know the artist and the emotion he's trying to convey in his music. Also knowing what makes that artist feel comfortable, having the right people around. There's so many aspects that come into how to get the best out of an artist. When I was young, I remember I was in a session of Louis Lav. He's a great producer in Israel. He also produced Bruce Springsteen and Lou Reed and stuff like that. And I was just a guitar player, but there was a vocal session, and I saw how he completely changed the vibe of his studio to make the singer just like more comfortable, like dimming the lights, putting some incense, having tea ready on the side, just making it feel very cozy, like, you know, they're in a non-pressure environment. And for that specific artist, that's what he had to do to make her. She was a singer called Diana Golby, and I saw how just that shift of energy of the room made her feel more comfortable and almost forget that she's in a session. So I learned a lot from older people in my, during growing up, but it really depends on. I feel like it really. There's some artists that would nail a great take even if you don't have that energy around. So I feel like just be very sensitive to the energy of the artist and try to just like, when there's a session, there's usually time. So you just need to make the best of what you've got at the moment. If you can go the extra mile and have it all a perfect setting, it helps a lot. But sometimes you need to improvise. Like I recorded a record for Lucy Yeghiazaryan. She's a jazz singer, and that was in Brooklyn in a place called Wilson Live, which is a basement that I helped. It started as a rehearsal room for a jazz musician called Omer Avital, who's a great bass player. And well, that place is basically, it's not like a full-on studio. It's basically a rehearsal room, but like we made sure that there's vibe. The room sounded pretty cool as on its own before acoustics, and we, they came there. They thought they're coming to a studio, but there was like a rehearsal room. But I saw that she didn't care. She just cared about the music and the takes and the performance. So that's what we focused on, and we did the whole session of it was our first record. And we did a whole session live, no headphones. She was singing into a mic, but no one was hearing it. So they were all playing to her acoustic voice. But she is a great singer, so she has enough output for that. And I feel like on its own created its own magic at that moment. And I'm really, really happy with the result. Nice. That's
cool. I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide, The Art Method, the Advanced Recording Toolkit. In it, I share the details of how you can get pro studio results from your home studio. I've believed for a long time that it's the cooking, not the kitchen. If you can learn some of the advanced methods for getting great results in the studio, you can do it in any studio. I skip the basics and dive into the more nuanced info you need to level up the quality of your home studio recordings. Check it out now at brendandecora.com/art. And now, back to the show. What is one piece of outdated mastering advice that you'd like to revise, you think?
Outdated. Well, if it sounds good, it is good. Less is more. Well, I grew up on a lot of since I wasn't growing up around a lot of jazz, I feel like I liked a lot of James Farber's work and Al Schmitt. And when I found out that Al Schmitt hates EQ, basically tries to not EQ and use the mics, I was like, that makes so much sense. And it made me I feel like, well, we're talking about mastering, but it starts there. Yeah. So the fact that you have a good source and you're able to not process it because you get it right from the beginning, it keeps the fidelity going down the line. So the more you I'm all about preserving fidelity as much as I can. So I always try to use the least amount of tools that I can to reach my goal. So if I can do something with one piece of gear or one plugin, I would use that one instead of trying to achieve. Sometimes you need more to achieve it, but if there is a plugin that would get you there, and to mimic it with another plugin, you'll have to use 3. I would always opt for the less is more for one, because it just, every time you pass through something, the thing I would say, always listen to the degradation of the sound instead of what it gives you. When I started, it felt like I was, let's say, putting a decapitator on something, and I was listening to what it gives me. Oh, it's cool, it's distorting, but I was never listening to the degradation. I was always listening to what I'm getting from it, but not what I'm losing. So I feel like what helped me becoming a mastering engineer is when I started to listen to what I'm losing. And when you start listening to what you're losing instead of what you're gaining, that's kind of helps you develop an approach of less is more.
Right.
So that's the thing I would tell people to put a ear on every little plugin that, you know, sometimes you're like, you get a new plugin, you think, oh, it's so cool. And then like a week passes and you're like, oh no, maybe that plugin isn't so cool. It was just like a honeymoon phase, you know, so the more your ear develops, you tap into it much quicker. And I feel like hearing the things you're losing instead of the things you're gaining really develops your ear.
No, that's very interesting for sure. And how do you adapt your approach for live recordings versus studio recordings?
So, well, since I did a lot of jazz, I did do a lot of live recordings, all musicians in the same room. So it's all about the leakage and using leakage to your advantage. One thing I used to do a lot is check my kick and snare is in phase in my piano mics and like making sure. And actually, since I understood that leakage is your friend, I actually like players being close to each other so that the leakage doesn't sound like a room mic, but actually enhances the other instrument. So the closer people are, the more they're gonna have to listen and play softer. I feel like that's a big one for me when I understood that just making sure that the leakage is working symbiotically and in phase with each other. That's what's created that 3D depth and magic you can't even reach with overdubs and separated rooms. And that no matter how much reverb and how much tricks you're going to try on it, there's magic with having a live recording with all the musicians at the same time. And
as long as they understand that editing is difficult.
Exactly.
Then, you know.
But my approach is like use the leakage to your advantage. Make sure everything works in phase when it's leaked, so that. And also good players, you know, when they play the room well and they play the right dynamics. I always opt when it's live, if they can do no headphones, if there's an option to that, I would opt always for that, because then they listen to the room. Because when today with all these headphones and the mixers, if they have the wrong balance in their headphones, they might be banging the drum, but it's only because of that mix they're getting in their headphone. If you take it off, they would play to what actually is happening in the room. So that was a big one for me. When I understood these things, it really made a much nicer live recording.
Nice. And I hate to even ask this question. I've never asked this before on the podcast, but since we spoke a little bit about it before we started, I feel like I have to. What is your take on analog versus digital?
Well, to be honest, I always thought that, you know, so in recording, I feel analog is a must. I feel like today, if you want to capture analog mojo, let's call it, I would prefer doing as much as possible in the recording, especially because everything is moving into the digital era, and like a lot of mixers working in the box these days, even the majority, even if it's hybrid, they're relying on digital a lot. And I feel like if you can get enough of that mojo and sauce in the recordings, then actually in the box would work better. I feel like only if you recorded like poorly microphones, poorly converters, then maybe some analog gear in the mix would. So my philosophy with analog is early on the better. If you have it enough in the recording, you can make it work in the box after the recording. But if you haven't enough there, you might want to add it in the mix. And then if you don't have it in the recording and the mix, then sometimes analog mastering can give you that extra zhuzh, because there's too much digital sounding recording. So sometimes it warms it up. But with people that I work, I feel like mixers working so loud these days. They're submitting loud mixes, and sometimes as a mastering engineer, I feel like I'm mastering a master, or sometimes the mix is louder than what I would even want to master it. And
well, I have to comment on that too, because I do mostly mixing, and sometimes my hands are tied because that's what they've done already.
Exactly.
So it's like I have to do something that competes with their demo.
There you go.
And they've already done that. So it's like, okay, well, I have to. And I feel bad giving it to the mastering engineer, but,
That's how it is, yeah. So I completely understand that. Mm-hmm. But I also think that, like, since it's already, let's say those mixes mainly these days are loud in more commercial music, then what happens is that if you use analog, you have to trim it down. You have to lower it. Yeah. And in my, from my experience, any, like, especially digital attenuation is already a loss of fidelity.
Yeah.
So when you lower a fader or an output of a plugin, I usually try to work around it. I feel like every time I lower a digital fader, I'm losing fidelity. And I feel like if you have to lower or trim your mix so that it will go into your analog chain in the right level so that it doesn't clip your analog gear, it's already like sometimes it's a compromise because you want to use that. Right. Sometimes you'll get a better result because you're using analog gear, but in my opinion, there's no debate that the fact that you have to trim it down, you're already losing some of that bits and fidelity of your file. So I feel like more and more mastering engineers are also converting into in the box. Right. Some would say it's because of the amount of work and it's more efficient. Yeah. But I feel like, and some say that they get better fidelity or more low end or less coloration. Or so when I master, I don't try to reinvent the mix. I'm not trying to if they did it, if there's enough coloration on it, there's a thing going on and it sounds good, if the mix is good, I actually prefer working in the box. The only times when I work in the box and I feel like I wish I had more like a expensive analog setup is if the mix is like more amateur mix and it lacks some color. I still think that digital is like, let's say, tubes or tape. These are two things I feel like digital just doesn't emulate it quite as good as the real thing. When it comes to cleaner things like FETs, compressors, I feel like sometimes the digital is so close and spot on that it just works. So it's a love and hate relationship, but I'm doing it because it's just more efficient. It's faster. Revisions, we all know these things, and it definitely just works.
Definitely. And how do you keep up with the rapid pace of change in technology, and how's your workflow evolved with it?
Well, since I'm working in the box, I feel like I have to be up to date in all the new technology, all the new plugins that are coming out, test them, demo them, if I can be a beta tester for companies, just to get as much tools as possible, because at the end of the day, like I mentioned earlier, is like, for me, it's all about finding that one tool that does a lot of things at once that that would eventually make me use less things. So, and I do feel that digital is growing in such a rapid pace, and they're sounding so good these days that you can definitely reach those results, And to be honest, when I saw like people like Chris Geringer talking about how he moved in the box, or I think his name is Adam Ian, also moved in the box, even though they have all the gear at their disposal, it's right there, and they're like, we're not using it because, and I feel like it's both of it. It's the efficiency of work, but also mixes come in so cooked these days. And they're so ready. So sadly to say, I feel like mastering is, if AI, and as we see AI taking over a lot of clients that don't have money, they're using AI, if it's Ozone or if it's websites that give you that thing. I feel like it would be the first process to, unfortunately, we're going to lose, because if you think about it, mastering started from changing medium. So you had a tape recording that needs to go into vinyl. You need an expert to change medium for consumption. And we had computer and tape going to CDs. Changing to a CD is a new, like the consumer end product is a different medium. So you need to kind of have someone who knows how to do that transfer. But today, we're submitting a WAV file to do the streaming. We so basically what the mixer has, and what the mixer submits is the final type of file that the consumer is getting. So mastering became a completely different thing. It's basically I don't have that role of like, if you want to do a vinyl, then you need to go to a professional who knows how to print it. But since we're staying in a WAV file, I feel like it's a very different approach. You need to be even more subtle, because you know how in vinyl you need to cut a bunch of the low ends so that the groove doesn't jump. All these rules, those are like limitations of the consumer medium. So I feel like since we're staying in the same medium, the mixer, I feel like that's why also naturally the mixers are pushing it and because they're like, oh, I can make it sound like a master already. So and I don't I agree with them. I think it's cool. I believe in record like there's no mix like there's no master. And
then what does the master do?
There you go. It starts with knowing what not to do. Sometimes I just listen to a file, and you know, today I think, you know, you just need to have a good room, good converter, someone with good ears that you trust, and he needs to know when not to do something and be like, you know, this mix is perfect. I'm not gonna touch it. Or these days a lot of masters, like I said, come even louder than what I would like to master. So I don't make it louder. And I really care about fidelity. I don't mind, like sometimes I got clients who are like, why isn't the master louder? Or like I was expecting it to be louder. I'm like, this is already so loud. If I'll make it louder, I'm just gonna hurt your music. So, you know, if that's what it means, you know, sometimes today mastering engineering is more about being in touch with the mix engineer and maybe telling you how to tweak the mix just a little bit, just to make that the master, and then that's completely fine with me. I'm all about helping the artist and the mixer just getting the best results, even if it means that I wasn't really hands-on or didn't need to do it. That took me a while to understand. At first, I felt like, you know, people are paying me. I have to change it. I have to make it louder. I have to do something. But that came from a place where I wasn't confident enough, and I felt like I have to change it. They're paying me, they need to hear something different. But today I stick to my beliefs, and if I get a mix that sounds great, or sometimes it's not because it's sounding great, sometimes because it's too loud, there's no headroom, then I have my own tricks to how to sometimes not change the level, but change the feel or the depth without adding anything too much. But sometimes it's just like, okay, this is what it is. And I stick by it, you know. I always say, man, if a client will call me and be like, hey, I don't feel you change anything, I'll be like, I'll stand by it. I'll tell him exactly why. And usually it's after I try to change it a bunch, and it's never...
It's not better.
It's not better. So I would tell them that. I think they would appreciate it. And if not, then maybe I'm not the guy to do the job.
Oh, good. That's awesome. And how do you decide when a master is finally finished?
Wow. When I forget that I'm working, usually when I listen to the song and it moves me emotionally, and I kind of, because I always tend to try and, okay, let's do another version, let's tweak it. Like before I send the final one, I try everything. But when I feel like it moves me emotionally, and just that I forget that I'm working, and I become a listener, then I know that it's probably where it has to be. But to be honest, there's no such thing as they say. Like there's no such thing as a final mix or a final product. There's a mix you let go. That we all have a time frame. People, and then this industry becomes faster and faster. Unfortunately, people want to release a song every month. They want it fast. So we need to adapt to that kind of need of the artist and the way the industry works today. So I feel like basically is just knowing that also, well, the deadline helps sometimes. Then, you know, sometimes it's, this is the deadline. There were a couple of times that I had a strict deadline. I sent the best work I can, but I was like, if I had more time, maybe I could have tried 10 more different approaches and get a better result. But you know, sometimes these limitations is what makes us become better. And basically adapt to the needs.
For sure. Awesome. I like to wrap up each podcast with the same few questions. The first one is, who has been your most influential teacher?
Wow.
And it could be a few if you want.
So I would have to say Jonathan Weiner from...
Okay.
He was my professor in Berkeley. He's pretty much the person who made me understand things that no one ever talked to me about. He just knows so much, and he also did a bunch of great videos for Isotope on YouTube. You can find it. He's a great mastering engineer, but also a great professor. And since he's been through all the different, like, you know, from analog to first digital iteration, he really knows the ins and outs of everything. So he opened my ears to things like anti-aliasing filters, or like converters, or like a bunch of things that I never thought about. That's basically made me really dive into the technical aspects of tools, because I believe the more you understand in depth what each tool does, it helps you become a better listener and develop your ears. If you know what to listen to, because you know technically what it's doing, it helps you hear the differences. If you don't know what to listen to, then you're just guessing. And if you know that an anti-aliasing filter is filtering harmonics depending on the sample rate, then you know that you need to listen to the higher register and how it's affecting the resonance of the harmonics. And if I wouldn't know the technical aspect of it, I would probably hear a difference, but I wouldn't be able to point at, like, listen to that. That's what's actually happening.
Exactly.
So he made me become, like, super into the technical stuff. Yeah, I would say that he's the main teacher that really influenced me into understanding what mastering is, and understanding that there is a place for people who dive in very, very deep into fidelity and the small stuff that sometimes I actually advise producers and musicians to not go there. Because once you start hearing like an engineer, you sometimes lose the artistic stuff and the artistic place, which sometimes I feel like the more I master, the more I become more analytical and critical about small things, because it's not my job to change the artistic view. So it's more about how can I squeeze 2-3% more fidelity out of this thing to make it, you know, I'm not gonna throw distortion on it and start to artistically do things. So my approach is very clean, and In the Box helps me with that, actually, because you know, when you go out of a converter and back in, you need to really have super high-end converters and good electricity and good. There's so many things that goes into it that sometimes I feel like that staying in the box stays even truer to the mix that people send me. If I'm not gonna go out and back in, I'm working from the actual thing that they approved, the artist approved, and I really respect the fact that they approved the mix. And from my experience, artists also, you know, they do so many revisions on mix, and when it comes to the mastering stage, they just want to get it over with sometimes, because the mixing takes a longer time.
Gotcha.
And I feel like staying in the box also makes the client more happy, because I can change it without, and if I don't want to change it at all, I can. And I feel like if you go analog, even if you don't touch any gear, you go out and back it, you already changed it. Just by going out and hearing the converters working, you already changed the imaging, you get some character, even if there's no processing involved. So since my approach is very puristic in a way, to be able to not to change anything, so I feel like In the Box works perfectly for me.
Cool.
And
awesome. The next question, I don't know if it doesn't apply to everyone, but the question is, what is your favorite reference track if you're like going to a new studio or whatever? But obviously you work at your place a lot, so that may not apply. Is there something you put on to be inspired, or something? Well,
I actually do listen to references every day. I come to the studios, the first thing I do, I listen to my references to kind of calibrate my ears, because I feel like, if you know, every day you sleep a different amount of hours, maybe you had a rough night, and sometimes these things affect our ears, and the more you become sensitive to your ears, you can get to a point where you actually start hearing the differences in your ears. Like, since we're born, like we have a right hand, a left hand.
Yeah.
It's not as strong. Same with our ears. It's not.
Yeah.
They're not the same. And if you do a hearing test, you'll get different results in both ears. So when you start being actually very aware of it, it's something you can't unhear.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very sensitive to how I hear my music. I feel like I'm in a building where there's 30 more studios, and just by the amount of cars in the parking lot, I would know how my speakers sound today, because they're soaking more energy from the
electricity.
It's really like that. So
Jeez.
I have to hear the references every day to calibrate how my room sounds and how my ear sounds the same day. And I use a bunch of different tracks for that. I like listening to Chris Stapleton, Traveler, Herbie Hancock, Imagine Project, some Richard Bonham recordings, and I have a bunch of different genres, so it depends what I'm in the mood for.
Right.
But these are songs that I can share with you, maybe the list after what's my reference track that I'm using. But it's songs that I know like at the back of my hand, like specific songs. It's not like whole records. I choose like a song or two from records I like, so that when I play them, I instantly know if it sounded the same to me yesterday or that's, so I use it as a calibration tool for your answer, because it's my like you said, it's my studio. But if I go to a different studio, of course I use the same tracks and kind of get the sense of how these songs sound. And if they sound bad, then I have to make my work sound bad as well in that room, and not try to fix it.
That's exactly, that's the idea. That's crazy. Last question. What would be one tidbit you have for an upcoming engineer?
Sorry, what?
One piece of advice.
Piece of advice. Well, just listen to your heart and listen to, and let also, don't always listen to your heart and adapt. So you might think you want to be a guitar player, but then you figure out, oh, there's so many great guitar players, maybe I'm not supposed to be. So don't let it push you down. There's so many, for me it was always music. I fell in love with music. I didn't know that I'm not going to be an artist or a guitar player or mastering or mixing it. Do it all, it's fine. I feel like modern times actually make us do more, wear different hats every day. Back in the day it was more like he's the arranger, he's the producer. Today people have less budget. Studios are, you just need a laptop and a good vocal mic to make a hit sometimes. So just adapt to whatever comes your way. If you're the best engineer in the room, be the engineer. If you're the best musician, be the musician. Don't let, if you are very focused on, I want to only produce, it's fine, you can hone on that. But if there's a day where you're the best engineer in the room and there's another producer, don't be like, I'm not an engineer. Just help out, do whatever you can. It will help you excel forward. That's at least how it was for me. Because I was sometimes, when I thought I'll be a guitar player, I was like, I'm gonna be a guitar player, play guitar all my life. And at first when I realized that it might not be what I'm gonna do, it kind of pushed me down a little bit. I was like a bit frustrated from it, but eventually I just grew from it. And the more I was open to just, do what I can do the best. You just give yourself to the moment and what you can give. And another thing is always try to be the least talented person in the room. That's one of an advice that I got early on, and I feel like really helps. Try to surround yourself with the most talented musicians, with the most talented engineers. That's the way to learn. And naturally, if you do that, there's going to be scenarios where you're the best in the room just because you learned from the best. Because if you're always surrounding yourself with people with more knowledge, more experience, then you learn from them. And you might be frustrated that you're not the least talented person in the room for a while, but after a lot of years of that scenario, easily with a lot of different people growing up with your experience, you'll become the best in the room.
Of course.
that's one
nice
one piece of advice that I
awesome Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining in today on Pro Audio Profiles. Make sure to hit subscribe, and I'll see you next week.